Welcome, as I say. So, thank you very much, Ilke. That's perfect timing. So, welcome to this Experts at Work webinar, which is on banishing the Sunday night blues. This session is for members of all three of our networks. As I say, recorded with a session, not the breakout rooms. And a big welcome to Kirstin Furber, People Director at Channel 4, and IIke Incegolu, who is Professor of Organisation Behaviour at Exeter University. Two things that really strike me about this session, and thank you both to IIke, both IIke and Kirstin for doing this. One is that Sunday night blues was something Kirstin, as an HR director, wanted to do something about, and has wanted to do something on this for a while. Has been writing about it, I know, Kirstin. And so we have this really interesting partnership between an HR director and a university, which I think is what's quite striking in itself. And secondly, as a subject, it seems to me a very relatable, very recognisable to bigger subjects such as employee engagement and mental well-being. So I think it's a really interesting take on it. So thanks to you both for doing this session. We're going to, in terms of timings, Kirstin and IIke will be sharing some thoughts for the first third or so. We'll have a breakout room session with some questions for you to consider for about 15-20 minutes after that, finishing with some reactions from everyone on the call and some discussions over possible solutions and approaches. Hard finish at 3 o'clock. Send us questions and suggestions via chat throughout, and I'll keep an eye on it. And if you could put yourselves on mute for now, that would be much appreciated. Kirstin and IIke, over to you, and thanks again.
Great. Well, IIke, shall I do a little introduction and then I will pass over? So IIke and I have been doing quite a few double acts recently, but Richard, thank you for that introduction. And I know some of you on the call, so it's lovely to see you. And as Richard knows, I'm very passionate about the importance of how our profession can really support organisations. And I think personally very passionate around culture, but how can you create the right environment to really shape growth, or as one of you were talking about, create some big change in terms of the companies that we work with. So people we know are really important, and I know I'm saying that to everyone on this call who deals with people every day. So I think what happened was, as Richard said, given this as my interest, I started to blog around this probably about 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe even a bit longer than that. Set up my site, kirstinfurber.com, and I stumbled over this thing, shall I say, Sunday night blues, which was around this thing you get on a Sunday, maybe afternoon or evening, of like a little bit of anticipation about what's happening on Monday. And I started to talk to friends, I started to talk to colleagues, and they were like, oh, actually, I have that too. Oh, what is it? So I started to realise it was a bit of a thing. And as many of us know, it's all right saying it's a bit of a thing and maybe some things that we can do, but data and validation is really critical in this world. So I was very, very lucky to get introduced to IIke, who, as you can see here, in terms of, is the director at Exeter Centre of Leadership. And we started talking about Sunday night blues, personally what it meant for us, but also was this something that we could really look to research and really get underneath about what was it, what caused it, and importantly, what can we do about it. I think IIke, that's sort of where our, I think we've now become very good friends as we talk about this so much and have been so open, but that's really where it started. So I'll pass over to IIke to really talk through the research from there.
Well, thank you, Kirstin. Thank you, Richard, for the invitation. And yeah, I think it was really fascinating when Kirstin and I started talking about it. Looking at the Sunday night blues as something, yeah, as Kirstin said, a lot of people can relate to, but I thought it was also fascinating to look at it from the HR and work perspective, because when you Google the Sunday night blues, you actually find there's quite a bit of advice on what you can do, and a lot of it is not necessarily evidence-based, and there is really the kind of perspective of what can the workplace do and what can HR do? I mean, this whole perspective is really, really missing when you read about it. So we wanted to really understand what is going on. So I present some preliminary findings. And also then the long-term idea is, and we're working on this, is what can we do to develop basically something to, help HR directors, employees, managers to banish it. So yes, here are all our partners. So yeah, Kirstin, of course, leading figure in the HR field and discussing this topic. So I'm starting with a quote so I'm down at the prospect of going back to work, worried about volume, which will hit me tomorrow. And I think a lot of us can really relate to that. So the Sunday night blues, so why should we care about it? And Kirstin already hinted at it. There is actually the potential impact on employee engagement and talent management issues if people are depressed on a Sunday night about going back to work. Yeah, it's a bit worrying. And we want to really help shape conversations around employee well-being and mental health in organizations. And when we talk about the Sunday night blues, it seems to be a topic that, because people can relate to it, seems to make this kind of route into these types of conversations easier. Then we also want to provide managers with support for their own well-being and that of their employees. And I mean, one of the really findings is it is important for managers to look after their own well-being, and well, managers experience it too, of course. Here's another quote. So I'm going through some of the preliminary results that we produced, and well, these are based on interviews with several organizations. Here's another quote. So Sunday never feels like a day off. There's always too much preparation for the following week. And another one, Sunday to Monday is a tough transition mentally. So we wanted to find out, why is it? Why is this transition so well, challenging for actually quite a few people? So the objectives then of the project were to understand, what does the experience feel like? What are factors that make people feel down on a Sunday? How does it affect their work? And eventually, how can we develop basically a toolkit to help banish the Sunday night blues? And it is a research program that looks at this from different angles. We're using interviews, using surveys, we're running focus groups now. Actually, we just finished the focus group research, still analyzing data. And yeah, you will see that it's a quite individual experience, and that's why we're kind of tackling it from different angles. So what does it feel like? I've already given you a couple of quotes here, a few more. So I'm just starting to feel stressed already, even though you or I am not back in the workplace. And that is the fascinating thing about it, that it really cuts your weekend short. And it's as if your mind starts to turn from what is generally either relaxation or enjoyment at the weekend into worries about everything you've got to do in the working week ahead. So that's another quote that nicely summarizes the preoccupation with work. And also something about Sunday afternoon or evening, I don't know, being like a magnifying glass where suddenly everyone remembers unfinished tasks, the to-do lists, and of course also worries about not being on top of work on a Sunday morning. Sorry, Monday morning. Some people do start the Sunday by actually engaging with work to be on top of work. So what does it feel like? As I said, it's a quite individual experience. There are a range of feelings and thoughts, including anxiety about the week to come, feeling nervous, dread, and as we mentioned, preoccupation with events in the week ahead, thoughts about not having done enough, not being ready for the week, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, a decrease in confidence, and questions like, can I do my job? Am I good enough? And some people also mention that it affects their sleep. And one really interesting finding that we came across is that it is not just low job satisfaction. So actually, most people we interviewed were really passionate about their job, but still experience the Sunday night blues. And it seems there's quite a range of factors that, that make you feel down on a Sunday. And I start with the work-related ones, because we basically put these factors into two brackets. So work-related, and that's something where, from an HR perspective, we can do something about. And then there are more individual person-related factors where I think within work, you can sometimes indirectly do something. But anyway, starting with work, here's another quote. It's the dread of I didn't quite get everything done the previous week that I wanted to do, and you were able to ignore that on a Saturday, but just remember the mountain to do this that will hit you on Monday, and trying to resist the temptation to think about it too much. So Saturday seems to be often a typical day where people are busy with things and enjoy the weekend, or generally have a lot to do. But then on Sunday, what seems to contribute to thinking about work is having unfinished tasks every weekend, high workload, and a busy week ahead. So firefighting seems to make it worse, and firefighting and not being able to get to core tasks. Workplace culture was mentioned as another factor. So expectations on employees that they need to do too much, receiving emails over the weekend, a general lack of work-home boundaries, and not having enough examples of people who model good work-life balance and boundaries. So that's something we're going to pick up when we look at what is it managers can do. Challenging meetings. Those were another point that came up. For instance, if you have meetings that are difficult, with difficult people, or very dry operational, those are things that already also feed into people's thinking loops on a Sunday. Then individual factors, imposed rather, and I guess people expose them in the interviews, and they're very open about their feelings about the Sunday night blues. So self-imposed expectations and ambitions, and a lack of assertiveness was also mentioned. So the employees and managers we interviewed said they finding it hard to say no to new project and extra work that can make the Sunday night blues worse. So what can we do to banish the Sunday night blues? Here are some recommendations from initial findings, and it would be really great to, we'll have some questions for you to discuss in the breakout rooms and hear what you think. So what can employees do? So here's another quote: physically moving. So these kinds of feelings, so the Sunday night blues probably come when I'm just stationary for a period of time, and then your mind just kind of wanders off into a kind of abyss. So activities to switch off, such as physical exercise, socializing, having a plan for Sunday evening, those were top tips. And everyone has, of course, different preferences. So you might find that socializing helps you more than going for a run. One important, I would say, overarching tip was whatever it is that helps you to kind of switch off, to actually intentionally plan something for a Sunday night. And talking to someone. So talking to people was also mentioned as a strategy by people we interviewed who said they'd had, for instance, high stress situations in the past, maybe well-being issues, and they were very, very deliberate about how they planned their Sunday, and talking to others was something they found very helpful. Then the double-edged sword of working on Sundays. Here's another quote. Last week, for example, I had something I absolutely had to have done by the end of Monday. And I knew that I didn't have any time on Monday to do it. So I just thought, I've just got to do it, otherwise I'm going to be worrying about it. So this is a quote that is a good example of how many of us are in jobs and being passionate about what we do, where we sometimes have to maybe work on the weekend, or we feel we have to in order to stay on top of Monday. So working on a Sunday might increase feelings of being in control. However, it makes it harder to switch off. And it sometimes also creates non-work conflict. So the impact it has on partners or on family. And then one thing that came up in interviews is that people who said, okay, I'm just going to check into my emails on Sunday. I'm just going to do whatever, 15 minutes, but then it's 2 hours later and the family has not had much attention. And then in addition to not having been able to switch off, you might also feel guilt. So that's then another thinking loop. So one tip there was coming out of the interviews, don't work on Sundays if you can. If you have to do on Sundays, limit it and be really disciplined about time limiting it, time boxing it. Okay, so these were recommendations for basically employees, but what is it that managers can do? Here are a couple of quotes that nicely illustrate the recommendations. So having general respect for the boundaries of work and home life, which is just really important. Now we're in a hybrid situation. So that's something that came up a lot. Then managers can help through the way they manage Friday afternoon and weekends. If someone gives you a load of work on a Friday afternoon, you are going to have a more stressed weekend because you're not going to finish it. And I think that nicely illustrates that if you are on top of your own to-do list, for instance, as a manager on a Friday, and you pass on the work and you delegate it, to be actually mindful that this is landing on someone else's virtual desk and might have an impact on how they go into the weekend. Then another recommendation here was for managers to, well, really reshape Monday mornings and Friday afternoons. So having basically giving the team the ability to work on their own things on Monday morning and having operational meetings on a Tuesday, for example. And in some occupations, it's not possible to do that. Sometimes you need to have the Monday morning check-in. But then I think it's really important to have these discussions about how these types of meetings are being managed, that they are a positive experience and not long, dreadful operational meetings. Then having one-to-ones and progress meetings on a Friday, so there's nothing hanging over your team over the weekend. And again, I would say that's quite industry specific or occupation specific. I mean, in some organizations, these might not be needed. In others, teams find it really useful just to have a really quick check-in, maybe Friday lunchtime. So they know what the priorities are going ahead and yeah, nothing's hanging over the weekend. Offering support, so being the type of manager people feel they can talk to, and knowing the places they can refer the team to for instance, mental health support. I mean, one thing we found is really most organizations now have excellent support available, but sometimes managers don't quite know how to access it, and or they find it maybe difficult to have these types of conversations with employees about, offering this type of support. Then a top tip for me is really being mindful of your own work stress as a manager and asking for help if needed, and also setting clear work-life boundaries, both for your own benefit and to set an example to your team. It's basically being a role model, plus the finding, there's lots of research coming out on that if you are not well yourself, it will impact your decision making, how you lead others, how you manage and make strategic decisions. So, well, we're coming to the end here of these the snapshot. We've got 3 questions here, and I'll pass over to Richard. So we have 3 questions, and Richard, we will discuss all 3 in breakout rooms, and you're going to put them in the chat. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, I will do that indeed. We'll get the breakout rooms open first, and just to sort of take you through them, as IIke says, and thanks ever so much for that both. What does Sunday night mean to you is the first one. Secondly, from your perspective as an HR professional, what would you find helpful to support you and your employees? And then lastly, what do you see as barriers in implementing measures? So I'll put that on broadcast in just a second. But first of all, let's open some breakout rooms. You should be in with 2 or 3 other people, something like that. Apologies if there's some moving around, but hopefully not. And we'll have a good, let's see, 15, 20 minutes on these 3 questions, if that's okay. Thanks, IIke. Bear with me a minute. Okay, good luck, and we'll see you shortly. Just very much. So let's work through the questions. I suggest Kirstin and Ilke come in at any point, but let's start with what does Sunday night blues mean to you?
Don't mind going. Am I visible? Am I? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. We can.
Awesome.
Yeah,
so I think we kind of had a mix in our room of people where it might be something that is a sort of more common occurrence, and you do have that kind of strategy in place on a Sunday, and so your Sunday means getting ready for your Monday. Whereas there was a slight difference with some of us being a bit more, it depends what's going on at work, and actually maybe for a lot of the time your Sunday is your Sunday and it's your own, and maybe your Sunday means relaxing and going to bed early and just getting ready for Monday morning. But depending on, again, like I said, what's going on at work, because if you've got a particularly difficult situation that you're trying to deal with, or a really high workload, or something quite difficult is going on, then your Sunday means something slightly different, and it might be a bit more, oh, I've got a bit of dread and anxiety about what's going to happen, and therefore I can't focus on relaxing and having that downtime, and then it shifts a bit, so a bit ad hoc.
So some of it's contingent depending on the particular week, should we say, and others it's not. It's actually more general. Would you say that? Sorry.
Go on. Oh, yeah, that's right.
I was just going to ask, but without putting people on the spot too much, is the for those who have when it wasn't contingent, it was a more general feeling. Was that tied to the particular role or job, or was it actually wider than that? Rather like Ilke was referencing in the research, would you say?
I don't think we got to that part, that detail actually. Sorry, Richard.
No, that's all right. No, it wasn't part of the question. It just occurred to me because sometimes it could be. You can go either way. I think speakers. Does this sound? I presume this sounds familiar from the research as well. Both what Charlotte was saying.
Yeah, I mean, some people seem to always get it, and then also have like an onset afternoon, and others said, yeah, it was better or worse depending on their week ahead. So yeah, very individual experience.
I presume the strategies, depending on whether it's contingent or not, are different in terms of how you manage it.
You go, Ilke. Go on. You go. Yeah.
I would say yes. I mean, we're still working on that, but one thing, so people we interviewed didn't necessarily have strategies in place. I mean, some did because they always had it. Others had tried things, and for others it was just this is just my Sunday night. It's just the most dreaded evening I have, and I think that's why it's so interesting. And yeah, I think Kirstin was at the forefront with this, actually bringing this out and discussing it. Some people even found it surprising that others suffer from it too. And then there also seems to be a little bit of a, kind of stigma attached. It's like, okay, I can't actually speak about it because it means I'm not committed to my job.
Definitely. I think that, as we're saying, very personal. But also what we were talking about in our group around, well, it's many different things in terms of how it might show up, but have we thought about it under the banner, rightly or wrongly, of Sunday night blues? And maybe we're saying we might not want to frame it in that way because there's quite a long level to anxious, I can't sleep, to, well, I'm excited about starting work, but I know it's going to be really, really busy. So I think it really does come from that personal view. And I see in the chat as well, it's again, we were talking about the merging of with hybrid working. It's not just about work, it is really about your whole life. And I think we've seen that even increase, as we all know, over the last few years, but it does come out of the research as well.
Yeah, interesting. And it wasn't interesting what somebody network member put in the chat. So it's a more a lifestyle, less tied to work, which that was a very interesting point. Hello, Shelley.
Hey, you can't see me. Something's gone horribly wrong with the camera, so apologies. I think I'm still attached to a Zoom that I got booted out of, so I can also not see the chat. So if I'm repeating what the people said in the chat, do stop me, Richard. I think there's just like a really mixed view, I guess, and I think some people in our group, I don't know if Leslie minds me saying, but she just protects her weekend. So actually, if we don't do that, we're not productive in the week that follows. But there's quite a lot of discussion around what happens in the week that then prompts us to worry about things at the weekend. And so some of the factors, and it's worsened since COVID, which everybody would probably put in the chat already, but this kind of always on back-to-back meetings and so on is a compounding issue, because if you can't find the time to think, to work in between back-to-back meetings in the week, it becomes a pressure onto your own time. So I definitely know in my diary it says no meetings after 5 p.m. That's when I actually get my work done, which is just, I know work can be productive in meetings, but I actually can't get to the thing I need to do that will take this organisation forward until late in the evening. And so that happens regularly, that then by the end of the week, you've consumed all your time. One thing we talked about is on a Friday, which is a contributing factor to the weekend, is that because of that, and because we've got a really inclusive policies, there's lots of people who don't work on a Friday. So those people who are in the office on a Friday tend to take the hit on behalf of colleagues that are not in on Fridays. And so where you might have had some reflection time on Fridays and organise yourself for the week coming ahead, you're actually still fighting fire on Fridays. The myth of Friday's less busy, it isn't less busy, but there's fewer of us as well. So there's this new problem that means you're kind of not organised for the next week, and so you can't organise what might have been your thoughts on a Friday ready for Monday. And we think things that get in the way of that might be culture around long working hours. Our inclusivity policy is great, but it's also sort of working against some of us over others. And some of the things that might help, we might be able to kind of think about how we manage our working week in totality, rather than just focusing on what we might do on Sunday, if that makes sense. My husband has a on the couch after 6. That's it. So I'm not going to the cinema or running anywhere. He's in his family do smile about it. They'll go, well, don't invite Lee on a Sunday night because he doesn't get to go out beyond 6, because he just has to relax and get ready for the next week. But in doing that, I'm probably sat there watching whatever he wants to watch on TV, thinking, I've got this to do and I've got that to do. And if only I went upstairs and didn't spend time with my husband, I might get a bit further ahead, which can't be right, can it? Anyway, so that's not a tight summary, but what we were discussing.
It's a good summary. It's an excellent summary. Interesting points about some of the drawbacks of a well-intentioned inclusivity policy. Also looking at things in the totality like that as well. And as someone's put in the chat, yeah, I love the sofa after 6 rule. I think let's call it a rule. I like that. That was good. Eddie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, I think it's quite interesting from the group that it's a very different lived experience from person to person. I definitely related to this a lot more a few years ago. One of the big things I changed, I started working part-time, and actually it has similarities of that kind of returning, it's the same concept of children having it. Comes from being a child. Socially, we know that working weeks start for the majority of people on a Monday morning, the same concept of going back to school. And from our experience, we mindfully said that's not the lifestyle that we want to have, that we want to, work is for work. And I really love my job. So I don't wake up thinking, oh, I don't want to go to work, but I made the choice that I will get everything out of my weekend that I possibly can. But the discipline come from wanting to work part-time and therefore having to departmentalize my work life versus my home life. And we discuss which actually with the flexible working, that becomes a lot more challenging, but it is people's personal journey. So from a HR perspective, re-emphasizing how people should feel, it's very culturally but empowered to work their working life that's fit for them. So one of the questions came up that it's very traditional to have your all hands meeting on a Monday morning. Why? Originally, that was because in a lot of circumstances, we would all come to the office on a Monday morning. And actually, what a great way to energize people that don't want to come to work by coming all together and, you know, let's talk about our weekend. But actually just questioning the timings of certain meetings and those things that we pile up on necessarily on a Monday. Does it have to happen then? Why are we doing our planning outside of our working week when we're not getting paid for that? Who's created that? Do we have to do that? And actually, can we push it further down? That was one of the concepts we were speaking about, of just re-asking the why. Why do we do certain things at a certain time? And doing that en masse is obviously a challenge, because as individuals, we all have different wants and desires of what our working week looks like.
Yeah, which
not an answer, but more of a reflection.
No, they're good challenges, though. They're really good challenges, because you've taken it right back to the start of your point, which was that, as you say, everyone's got very different lived experiences, experiencing in different ways and with individual different needs. So, which brings us on to actually what your questions and your challenges highlight is, what are the barriers and challenges to HR supporting employees, which was IIke and Kirstin's question. And secondly, what would help you as HR people with this issue?
I think one of the things that our group was talking about was that it is a very individual, and I think, you know, Heidi, you mentioned that earlier, that it's a very individual feeling. Some people don't have the Sunday night blues, others dread it. I myself used to drive from London to Reading 5 days a week. The thought of that drive, it used to really piss me off, and, you know, I used to get quite tetchy, but now I don't have that and I'm fine. But I think one of the big hurdles is, you know, how do we know people are suffering from it? And I think since we've gone hybrid working, there's quite a few people that don't work in the office on a Monday. So I would imagine that probably helps. And we're giving people the flexibility of what days they want to work in most departments. So, you know, Monday's quite light here. Friday's like a ghost town. So I'm imagining that a lot of people are getting their affairs in order on a Friday, and hopefully they start the weekend, you know, feeling they've got everything done, or a lot of stuff done. But, you know, we were talking about a couple of sort of ideas. You know, the barriers potentially are, if you've got a culture where management are not interested in what people feel, you know, are they actually aware of a Sunday night blue issue for people? You know, and you may have difficulty in getting some kind of understanding or acceptance that people need a bit more flexibility. Here, we are very open to elder care and childcare responsibilities. If, you know, someone has to be at the school at 9 o'clock, that really isn't a problem in any of our departments. And I think hybrid working has actually helped to facilitate that a bit more. One of the ideas that I had, and also Nancy has got the same mental health employee resource group, is that, you know, we could have a talk about this, and hopefully people in that group would feel safe enough to talk about their own feelings, and it would help us understand if it is a bit of an epidemic here, which I don't think it is, but it could be. And I think it's finding out, and you could sort of add a question to an engagement survey. Again, I don't know whether that's going to elicit that, but I think that's a start, you know, and also just making managers aware that, you know, this is something. And the fact that IIke and Kirstin have done a study on this, I think it's fascinating. And the reason I wanted to join this because I identified with the title so many years ago. So I think it's a problem a lot of people have. And I think even acknowledgement from the company to say, look, we know this is out there and let's talk about how we can help. hopefully that would be, a demonstration of our support to people.
Thanks, Rob. Excellent. Yeah, I like that a lot. And what other things would people find helpful? Because Ilke and Kirstin's very interested in this part of the research. Where do we go from here? Really taking my cue there from Rob. What would you find helpful as HR professionals? Nancy.
Hi, I'm not necessarily sure helpful as HR professionals, but we discussed that actually it's not a widely spoken topic. So, and actually, if you start to ask people, I mean, within your HR circles, yes, it's probably a bit more widely spoken of, but you don't generally get employees talking about the Sunday night blues. Why is that? Probably because they think that it means they don't enjoy their, the managers will think they don't enjoy their job, or that they, and I think just normalizing that it's okay. It could be for a million different reasons, having to leave your family feeling a bit sad about you just had an awesome weekend, or, just thinking, I've got to make sure I'm on it on Monday, and I've got to have, that pressure that you put on yourself. Could be so many different things. But I think just talking about it more, I'm actually just off the back of talking to Rob, tomorrow we've got our wellness focus group for the first time ever. I'm going to ask the question because there's somebody from every country just about. I'm just going to ask the question so we can normalize it a bit more and ask them what they need.
Nice. Yeah, that's good. Good luck. Hope it goes well tomorrow. So it's a very good thing to do. Speakers, Kirstin and Ilke, is there anything we've missed or anything you'd like to ask the group, or a final point you'd like to make, especially about sort of going forward, perhaps?
Well, I think, Nancy, you're absolutely right. If I jump in, is around how do we normalise this now? Is it the Sunday night blues? Is it, what is it? They would just say, like, how do I feel? I really love my job, but I'm not on it at this moment. Can we have that conversation? Can we be open around it? And I think something I'm taking away from this conversation is this thing about how do we think about the whole week, because this is all in service of, if we can be our best, so we can do our best planning, our best thinking, doing our best work, that's going to help, our organisations, and it's going to help, the UK economy. And if we're starting off in that negative place for the beginning of the week, that's not helpful for ourselves and also for everyone else. So what are the things that I think that we were in control of now that we could be mindful of, like when the meetings we can choose, let's have a discussion about when we have those. Because those small things and that habit forming, whether it's on the sofa at 6, I think are really critical. And the last thing I say before I pass it to Ilke, this research continues on through to the end of the year. So if you'd like to know more, around, okay, what are some of the recommendations or outputs from it, then please let us know, and we can certainly update you and continue to be part of this conversation, because it's in a way, it's a bit of a culture shift, or let's be open about how we feel. That's enough from me. I'll pass to Ilke. I don't know if you've got other points.
Yeah, I think, great points. I just want to share one suggestion from our group, which I think is an interesting one. So having meeting-free Wednesday mornings, which was introduced during the pandemic. And I'm bringing it up here because it fits so with the headspace theme, because I think there's an issue of this whole, and that our group discussed, that having so many back-to-back meetings and not being able to get the work done and to do the strategic thinking, that it seems all the work then seems to be bunched up into the evening, spills over into the weekend. And I think that has a general impact also how we approach work, and to Kirstin points, also productivity. So I think it's probably a also interesting angle to look at it more from a work culture perspective.
Definitely. Thank you ever so much, both. And I just want to point people to the chat. There's two good contributions just to highlight. One from Shelley, great place to start with Sunday, but the night before the first day back is probably a more inclusive way to think about it. And from Leslie, some protected thinking space, either at the beginning or end of the working week, just to think and prepare. One from Shelley as well. So just pointing you towards the chat there. Thanks to Sissy. Kirstin, Ilke, good luck with this. Keep us in touch. We will, of course, keep in touch with you. Keep sharing on the WhatsApp group, everybody, and we'll see you at the next session. But thank you ever so much for coming along, and good luck with this one as well, particularly. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Bye.